Hello, everyone. I am super lucky to be able to introduce you to my friend Tim Brookes. He is possibly the most fascinating man in the world. We're not sure. Well, maybe we'll do a poll at the end of this summit and see who we decide is the most fascinating man in the world. But it might be Tim Brookes. He has written a series of books, and I am excited because we are going to do one of them as our inaugural book for the book club, which I'm also super excited about. Therefore, we have three wonderful things happening in this few minutes. I'm going to introduce you to Tim Brookes. We're going to talk about his books and how he got started writing them, what inspired him, and what they're about. And then we're going to talk about why you should be part of a book club that talks about By Hand, his last book. Take it away, Tim.
Okay, so everything I say is now going to be fascinating. I'm going
It's
to have to
always
work
going
on
to be
it.
fascinating.
So, hello everybody. Thank you so much for sitting in and watching this. And I'm sorry about my very dull background. I've just moved to England and my furniture has not caught up with me. So all I have is a wall. Okay, so about 16 years ago, I
Not in
started.
prison. You're just in an apartment.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah,
Here are the
we should clarify
bars.
for
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. Think
Yeah,
about
but
that.
there's some kind of fascinatings we don't need.
All right. Fair
Yeah,
enough.
yeah, we'll leave that one out as a, yeah.
So, yes, I started this organization called the Endangered Alphabets Project, which you can find at endangeredalphabets.com. And what I began doing is I'm not a calligrapher, but I began carving by hand pieces of text, individual words or sayings or sacred texts um, in wood that were from minority scripts from around the world that most people have never heard of. And in fact, most of them are endangered. And this was my way to try and draw attention both to these cultures individually and to the fact that there is this steady, gradual erosion of culture and writing in these places, and they are threatened. And that became my first book of my trilogy, which was called An Atlas of Endangered Alphabets. And what that does is to show examples of all of them, or many of them, and explain why they are so interesting, and also what they tell us about writing itself. That then became my second book, which was called Writing Beyond Writing. And Writing Beyond Writing came about because as I was looking at all these amazing forms of writing, I realized that what we think of as writing is actually a very narrow, limited definition. And all around the world, there are far more interesting or complex or graphically curious or beautiful or spiritual forms of writing. And our notion, which is that writing is like this, is really, as I say, very, very limited. And the only reason we have that notion is because our alphabet essentially conquered everybody else's by, military force. So the third book, the one that we're going to talk about now, is called By Hand. And I started out thinking that I would do a book called Endangered Alphabets Calligraphy. And the reason for this is that I got an email from a young woman from Indonesia, from the island of Java. And she thanked me for the work that I've been doing, promoting and preserving all of these minority scripts, including hers. And she said that she had found a group of letters that her grandfather had written home when he was fighting in the Indonesian War of Independence after World War II. And she thought, this is fascinating. I would love to know what it was like to be there, what that time was like, what the big questions were like, what the fighting was like, all of that stuff. But she couldn't read them because they were
Mm.
written in traditional Javanese script. And one of the first things that happened when Indonesia became independent, Indonesia is 17,000 islands. So to create some sense of coherence, they said, all right, we're going to have one official script, which
Right.
is in fact the Latin alphabet. And we're going to do all of our official important writing in that. And so that meant that all over these islands, people stopped teaching and using that traditional script. This is what endangered alphabets means. So here she is with this absolute treasure that she can't get to. So she was teaching herself the Javanese
Wow.
traditional script. And I thought, you know, this is a brilliant illustration about how our scripts, how our writing connect us as a culture, both in terms of creating a sense of bond between the people who use it, especially as is very common in, say, South Asia. They are scattered all over the world and, you know, in search of work. So it creates that cohesion, but it also creates a cohesion over time between you and your parents and your grandparents and your
Yeah.
ancestors.
Yeah, absolutely.
But as I was starting to work on that idea, I realized that exactly the opposite is happening in the developed world, especially the United States, where what is happening, in fact, is instead of the generations being brought together by writing, they're actually being driven apart because we have a situation now where we have a generation that has been writing on iPads and laptops since they were in primary school. And so consequently, they don't have the manual skills to write fluently or painlessly, and they can't read their grandparents' writing, especially if it's cursive, especially if it's to any
Yeah.
degree elaborate. And I thought, this is a really interesting situation. Here we are at this moment in time where, as I say, the West and especially the United States, we're kind of right on the precipice where we're rushing to go over the cliff and to say, AI is great, digital tools are great, everything is done more quickly and easily by email, all this kind of thing. But there are people who are starting to realize, wait a second, handwriting has all kinds of qualities, and we'll talk about those in a minute, that we are in danger of throwing out without even understanding what they are or how they work.
Yeah.
And so my book, By Hand, became an exploration not only of what is handwriting at this precise moment in time and what is going to happen to it, but also what have we overlooked in taking handwriting for granted? What has been right there under our noses, yet under the radar? And is there a way in which I can open this up so that people kind of go, I had never thought about that, but that's really, really true and it's really important.
When you talk about, so first of all, I apologize, everyone. I started talking to Tim and I forgot to press record. So 85% of languages in the world are now endangered.
Not languages.
No, no, no,
So
writing
there's difference
styles.
between spoken language and written language.
Yeah.
So something like 50% of the world's spoken languages are thought to be in danger of extinction, but something like 90% of written forms are in danger of extinction.
Like I know in Canada where I am, there's a big movement to bring back First Nations languages
Yep.
that were lost. So I'm just so curious about this. So when you first started determining that there was a gap between languages that are or written language and what's missing and what's still around, how did you go about finding the ones that were missing and finding examples of those missing scripts that were
Right.
or almost like they're almost ghost scripts, right? Like you can kind of see a shape of them still, You know that they were there, but they're hard to find now.
It's sort of like that and sort of not like that. So, for example, one of the islands in Indonesia is Bali. Everyone's heard of Bali.
Yeah.
So there was a traditional, really beautiful script that was used for writing the Balinese language. And like Javanese, when Indonesia achieved independence, in Bali, people stopped teaching this beautiful Balinese script. So it's not that it became a ghost script, it became a script that people recognized as like, oh, that's the old writing, but they
Right.
couldn't read it anymore. And this is especially important because many of these cultures, their script is to some degree sacred. And so you may have temples, for example, where you see these sacred writings on the wall, and you know they're sacred, but they have no meaning for you because you can't read them. And so it's as if they're just like visual icons. And so what gets lost then is not only a way of writing, but a way of seeing the world, a way of belief, a way of communicating with the divine. It's a huge thing and really much more meaningful than our alphabet, which is just like I say that the Latin alphabet is like linguistic duct tape. You know, you just
Mhm.
use it for the stuff you need to use it for.
Right. And also, it feels to me like by not preserving some of these scripts, you're also invalidating a whole history that's not Western, right? Like,
Oh,
how do you
that's
learn about what your not just your grandparents and your ancestors, but like the old traditions and the styles and the things that make all of the little things that, like obviously my family came over from wherever, Ireland, Scotland, all sorts of places, Norway, over the years, and we've lost tons of those little things. But some of them have just kind of seeped in through our DNA because through my parents honoring their parents' things and whatever. And some of them I can reach back out and find that history. I can find history books that touch on different moments of things that may have happened. And like you said, I can read the letters that were written. But if you don't have a written script, it also takes away your history.
exactly. And when you take away a culture's history, you take away its sense of purpose and its sense that it has a right to exist on this planet. So one of the
Independent of
things,
everything else on its
yes,
own.
so one of the things that when one culture overruns or conquers another, one
Right.
of the first things they do is to try to destroy that conquered culture's sense of specialness. And they do that by, for example, banning their script, but also things like, so there was a kingdom called Champa in what is now central Vietnam. And it was an independent kingdom, very peaceful, wonderful place. It was overrun by the Emperor of Vietnam in the mid 19th century. And in addition to banning the Cham script, so the Cham people were Muslims and Hindus who were cohabiting perfectly happily. But what the Emperor of Vietnam did was to force all of the Hindus to eat beef and all of the Muslims to eat pork as a way of subjugating them to the point where they would never think to, kind of rebel or rise up again. So if you can convince a people that they are worthless, they are
Mm.
much less likely to be troublesome, which is one reason why over the centuries, many individual people have created from scratch forms of writing for their people as a way of giving them a sense of identity and value. And that is such a powerful tool that we know of at least 4 cases where the government forces have executed people for creating a form of writing specifically for their people.
Isn't it funny what is scary? Right? Like something that we take so for granted
Yep.
can be so scary. So when you wrote by hand, I hear that you wrote it by hand.
Yes, yes, yes. So this is I've written 23 books now, and one of my favorite ways of writing is by kind of dragging myself into my subject. And
Mm,
so I wrote a book about hitchhiking around North America, and I did it hitchhiking around North America. And
wow.
I wrote a book about the campaign to eradicate polio, and I went out with the polio vaccination teams on the Pakistan-Afghanistan border. This
Holy
this is
cats.
this is I know. You said I'm the most interesting person in the world. This is the
I
kind of
know.
thing
I
we
think
interesting
we
people
should get
do.
back to that at some point. I did not know that about you.
Anyway,
I don't know very many people that because in some places that's pretty dangerous work.
oh yeah, oh yeah.
Like
Yes, at one point we were
people
having
that are
dinner at
giving
this little
polio
hole in the wall
vaccinations.
place, and we realized that there was a kind of a curtain hanging next to us, and at the table beyond the curtain was the Taliban. Um, and they
How
had
long
come
ago was
across,
this?
I'm sorry?
How long ago did you do this? Like you didn't do this like as a young man. You did this as
No,
somebody
I
who
did this
know
as a
better.
very, very old man. No, I did this. This was in 2008, maybe?
Good for you. Anyway, so tell us about the Taliban.
Yes.
I mean,
Okay. Oh no, it was the Taliban. So, a conscientious Muslim has a vow to help other Muslims. There had been
yeah.
a massive earthquake in northwestern Pakistan, and they
Mm,
had come across the border from Afghanistan to assist with finding people and dragging them out of rubble. I mean, it was a humanitarian mission. It's just that they were wearing those very characteristic sheepskin vests,
yeah.
and they may have had a couple of AK-47s and whatnot. So
Who
it
doesn't
was
really?
right. Anyway, back to why I wrote, how I wrote by hand. Yes. So I thought, if I am even going to come close to recommending to my readers that they ought to write, they ought to revive the art of handwriting, then I need to know what is involved. I need to know whether I'm actually recommending something that is possible.
Yeah.
Because I was in this position that so many people are, which is that I was ashamed of my own handwriting.
Mm,
When I was a student, I did everything by hand. I wrote all my college papers by hand. Everybody did. But when I became a writer by profession, I did everything first on a typewriter and then on a keyboard. And consequently, my handwriting is just, by the time
yeah.
I got to, working on this, my handwriting was basically scribble. And I thought, is it possible to approach writing as a conscious act of creation as opposed to I'm just jotting down whatever's in my mind, getting to the end of the line as quickly as possible? And my initial intention was to write the whole thing by hand on really, really good Japanese paper and then to
Mm,
print it in manuscript. So, you basically scan the pages and print from the scans. And this was the single most difficult thing I've ever done as a writer. It was way more difficult than having dinner with the Taliban. It was because what I
I'm going to
did,
remember you said that. I'm going to use that as a note take.
what I had to face was the fact that I was going to appear in public kind of naked because I do a lot of stuff in public, but I do things that I know I do well, that I am practiced at. So I love public speaking, for example, although
Yeah.
many people are terrified of it, right? But when I wrote by hand, I couldn't help looking at every letter and going, this one's taller than that one, and this one's sloping differently from that one, and it looks ugly. And my shame at my handwriting got so powerful that I wound up in hospital. I started having these little mini panic attacks. And eventually it only got resolved. But on the other hand, I also knew that I wanted to write by hand so that I could understand what happens between the mind and the body and the arm and the posture and the paper and all this kind of stuff. So eventually what happened was that my art director, Alec, said, you know, if we're going to solve this problem by, you're going to carry on writing this by hand. And in fact, I'll show you. So here is my giant moleskin. I did lots of experimenting to figure out, you know, what materials I wanted to use and what paper and how I would do it and you know what it would look like. And then I transcribed it onto the laptop and we printed it in the usual fashion. Although in the book, there's lots of photographs of my attempts to write.
Yeah.
And by the end, this extraordinary transformation had taken place. I love writing in public, in diners and cafes and whatnot.
Oh,
And by the end, I would be sitting in the diner writing with my good calligraphy pen, and people would come up to me and say, "You have beautiful handwriting."
oh,
And I thought, this is interesting because what is it that is encouraging them to connect with a stranger? What is it that that shows a common purpose that we clearly value so much? And these are not only people of my age who are kind of going, oh, yes, I remember when we used to write like this is like everybody. And I thought this says something fascinating about handwriting, that when you see somebody who is writing with intention and with respect, I have this little mantra which is respect the pen, respect the paper, respect the thought, respect the reader. And when you start writing with that in mind, then your writing starts to change. And you can, and people can see it. They can look at what you're writing and they know that you're bringing a different self to the page. And that is something that appeals in ways that printing doesn't. Printing or doing something digitally essentially simply conveys information. And this conveys intention, it conveys respect, it conveys creativity. The fact that, you know, when you do your G, you do a nice swoop, you know, all this kind of thing. And calligraphers know this. Calligraphers and typographers are amongst the only people who really think about writing in these terms. And for example, one of the things that fascinates me about calligraphy is that if you're a commercial calligrapher, then many of the gigs that you get, let's say, for example, someone's retiring and you're doing a certificate, or
right.
you're doing the lettering at a wedding, for example. So for the place names, those are occasions when the calligraphy is standing in for the touch of the human hand. So
Mm,
this is an occasion when you would do a handshake, or when you would clap someone on the back, or when you would give someone a hug. And what the handwriting does is to represent literally the hand
yeah.
and figuratively. And so as I'm writing this, I'm starting to understand just what this act or art of handwriting is all about and how it has developed. It's kind of co-developed with us as humans. to the point where I did a lot of research into neuroscience, and there are neuroscientists who believe that the human mind or brain could only have developed the way that it has, not only because of language, spoken language, but also because of this extremely sophisticated use of tools to convey language. And there are people who believe that writing by hand may be the single most sophisticated act the human mind is capable of. There are so many extraordinary dimensions to it.
So I have a question about that.
Go for it.
So when you're writing by hand, like when we're talking and we're just like sitting around, la 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 la, I often don't have to think very much about what I say, and I put a sentence out there that may or may not be garbage. And sometimes I'll even say something that I don't know anything about and I don't believe is true. Like I'll just say something. When you're writing by hand, like when you earlier you said the conscious act of creation. And I wonder about that moment when we're writing by hand, where you're taking the moment to convey your thoughts. Do you feel like there's a clarification process that happens there, almost like water, like impurities coming out of water, and we think better, and we are go for it. I'll let you finish
Okay.
that, because now I'm doing that thing where I'm saying words that I don't know what they mean.
So this is one of the things that I became more and more and more interested in the further I got into this book. For example, at one point, I had a bunch of things in my mind and I was driving and I thought, I'm just going to dictate this as I'm going. And I was really struck by the fact that, when you dictate, especially when you're driving, and you then play it back, it's full of ums and ers and dead air and all this kind of thing. And I'm thinking, this is sort of odd, because if really what we're talking about is like the spontaneous speed of the mind, then you shouldn't have all of those gaps and ums and ers. Plus, if you actually transcribe what you dictated, it's rubbish. It's not good writing.
Right.
It's fragments, it's bits and pieces. And I started to develop this hypothesis. This is a two-part hypothesis. One, that because the mind is so much faster than the pen, this means that as we are writing what it is we are kind of dictating to ourselves, the mind is actually able to kind of race ahead and say, oh, no, actually, I mean this, or this is a better word, or whatever. And so we actually have exactly what you said, which is this built-in kind of cogitation period, this reflection that's actually part of the act of writing, because the act of writing gives us the time to get there. But then the second thing that is also absolutely fascinating is that means that our minds are so bloody quick and brilliant
Right.
that you're able to sync these thoughts and these editings of these thoughts with the movement of your hand. Because when I'm writing, I've got good stuff in my mind, I'm thinking about it, I'm writing, there are no gaps, there are no pauses. And
Right.
what's more, when I get to the end of the paragraph, I kind of go, wow, that is not first draft stuff. That is final draft stuff, because the drafting has been taking place during the act of writing. That
Right.
is phenomenal. And I had never thought about the various components, the kind of the physical, mental components of the act of writing, because all my life writing has been just like, yeah, you get stuff down, boom, bing,
Yeah.
bing, 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 right? And it's only when you say, I want to write the best that I have to offer at this moment. All
Right.
right. I'm not going to become a genius overnight, but I, at any rate, want to engage in it in such a way that what I am writing is the best that I'm capable of at that particular time. And what's more, it incorporates this kind of all this reflective component incorporates the bringing in of new ideas even as you're writing. And
Right.
so that's one of the fascinating things about punctuation, for example, is that
Mm,
it allows us to kind of go, oh, and here's another thought, or oh, and in addition to that, there's so and so. So
yeah.
there are ways of bringing all of those dimensions instead of just thinking of writing as being word, 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 it's actually a way of drawing on all of this stuff which is tumbling in to our minds from somewhere and
Yeah.
enriching that whole process.
And okay, so by hand is the book we're going to do first. Are you coming to our book club? Are you going to come when we do it and talk to us? Let us bounce ideas off you, or can we just send you questions?
Um, if we can arrange the scheduling, I'm happy to zoom in.
Yeah, let's try and do that. We'll I mean, we got some time zone things, but we'll figure it out. I'd love that because I'm so curious to think about how reading a book about writing is going to change the way I think of writing.
Yeah, it also changes the way you think about reading. Um, I mean, it changes many things. But for example, let's go back to your group of calligraphers, whom
Yeah.
I have so much interest in and respect for. So I did this exercise just before I left the US to move back to England. I was doing a workshop at a small library in southern Vermont, and there was a pretty decent audience, but none of them were professional calligraphers, and all of them were ashamed of their own handwriting. That's
Mm,
so common, so common. And so there was a general air of kind of hesitation and mild gloom as we were discussing all of this. And so then I did this exercise where I said, right, this is what I want you to do. So the librarian passed out paper and pencils. And I said, I want you to write one word on this piece of paper. And that word is giggling. And you can write it more than once. And you can, you can try writing it neatly. You can try writing it elaborately. You can try writing it quickly, whatever. It doesn't matter. Just write that word giggling. So everyone does this, and of course they're kind of wary. They think, is this a trap? Am I going to test them or mark them
yeah.
or something? And so one of the things that I discovered as I was writing by hand is the letter G is a fascinating letter because essentially you have a kind of a home unit, which is a circle or a loop, which is
Yeah.
fairly simple and fairly consistent. But then you have this great descender that you could do all of these different things with. You could come
Yeah.
straight down. You could come down and loop off this way. You could do a Gordian knot, all these different
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
And not only that, but when you write the same letter within a word, it's almost bound to look different because your hand is moving with the act of writing. And
Yeah.
so the first G is automatically moving into the next letter. The
Yeah.
final G may be wrapping around back into the word as a whole, or may possibly fly off towards the next word. And then
Yeah.
when you've got this double G in the middle, nobody ever writes a double letter identically because the the shape of the letter is an idea, but it's not an act. And when you shape a letter by hand, your hand is doing as much work in the shaping as your idea of what a letter's supposed to look like. So everybody did this. And I said, all right, now what I want you to do is just look at each other's writing, just this one word.
Yeah.
And it was fascinating because all of a sudden, all of the shame disappeared. And instead, people were looking at each other's writing and going, oh, that's really interesting. So you do your I with the dot over here. I do my I with the dot up here. And, the L, oh, I always do this. And you realize that writing is something we own. It
Yeah.
is an incredibly democratic art form in that it allows us to do it so much in our own way that we can tell each other's handwriting. That
Right.
it
Absolutely.
and the atmosphere in the room changed from this kind of hesitant, gloomy, whatever, to one where they wouldn't stop talking. I had to shut them up. They were having
Right.
such a good time talking about this because they were now thinking of writing as a personal, expressive act, as opposed to writing as a technology for representing symbols.
Yeah. And it gives you a little bit of ownership over how you appear in the world and
Yes,
um how your thoughts are broadcast in a way
yes,
that typing does not.
yep. And in fact, when you then look at a piece of typing and you see every G is identical, you kind of go, why would we ever want to do that?
Right.
And what happens when all that we see is stuff that's typed and printed is that we actually lose the ability to process complex visual forms. And so we sort of go, is that a G or is that an L or is that a Q? Because it's just like accents. Since I came to England and I came to Cambridge, which is very multicultural, I have heard people speaking in dozens of different accents. And after quite a short while, you stop thinking this is the way that this person from this culture says this. It's just like these are all just people talking. And your ability to understand what they're saying improves as you stop expecting it to be something narrow and repetitive and
Yeah.
unexploratory.
Yeah. I always find when we travel that when I'm in a place, it doesn't really matter what kind of language. In fact, even when I go to the other end of town and there's a lot more diversity, where I live, it's pretty much everybody speaks English, but you kind of wander around and you hear different languages. I find my brain works differently. I don't know if it's better or worse. I mean, I think it depends on the day, maybe, but I think differently. My thought processes happen differently when I'm surrounded by other languages.
Yes, doesn't surprise me at all. And it
And I
means
think that
that
must be the
you are
same for writing.
being much more alert and much more receptive. And you're taking in more information. So there's this word that some of your attendees and friends and colleagues will know, which is stultification. So it's some
Oh,
Latin word
yeah,
stultus, which means stupid. And stultification means making somebody stupid.
yeah.
And the fact is that the narrower the range of visual material that we use, the more it stultifies us. In the same way that if we
I'm going to
then
use
have,
stultifying today in a sentence. That's my goal for the day.
yep, there
That's
you
a
go.
fantastic word.
So in fact, if you think about the difference between AI and a pencil, right? We
Right.
think of AI as being really sophisticated and pencil as being very, very kind of kindergarten. But in fact, AI, we're actually giving everything over to the robot to do our thinking for us.
Yeah.
And with the pencil, what we do is we do this iterative stuff where we sketch and we try this and we improve it and we do this and we rub little bits out. And every time we look at what we've done and improve it, it's making us smarter. It's actually making us think about what it is we really want to do and how it is we really want to express ourselves. So in that sense, the pencil is an infinitely more sophisticated cognitive tool than
Yeah.
AI, which is a tool for stultification.
Yeah. Is it ever? And it's increasingly uh, scary how much, like, not the people out there. I'd love to say it's the people, but how much when I need to send a quick thing and get my thoughts across, how much I rely on AI to clean up an email. And if you've read an email from me, and it made a lot of sense, chances are AI cleaned it up. Because like I am at the point where sometimes, especially when I'm in a rush, instead of taking the time to calm down and think things through and really get a sense of what I want to do, I rush right in full like ADHD mode and say, oh my God, I got to get 500 things out there today. And none of them haven't been thought about at all. And I don't
Right,
take that time to back up and think about things and clarify and even decide if it's the right thing to do or not. Because you can do things so fast now with AI. You
right,
don't even have to decide if it's a good idea.
exactly.
It's yeah, I fear for our children.
And that's exactly the kind of crusade that I realized that by hand was coming to represent. I didn't fully understand that at the beginning, but the more I wrote it, the more I realized, yeah, we're looking at the the values and the practices that we are recommending to our next generation and our generation after that.
Awesome. So I'm going to put a link in the chat of this call that will have a link to your book. It's only like seven, is it €7 50 or £7 50 or $7 50?
$7.50. So
Seven, not
that's yeah. So yeah, so it's endangeredalphabets.com/by-hand, and that takes you to the page and in the Endangered Alphabets website, which is the shop link
yeah,
for by hand. And yeah, so you go in, you're going through PayPal, and as soon as I get a notification from PayPal, I email the digital edition. I mean, the ironies here are just all over the place that the mail has become so expensive,
right.
partly because so much communication is now being done digitally
Yeah,
that we don't subsidize mail services the way we used to. So now, certainly if any of your followers or your group want to buy a physical copy, that's fantastic. But the price of shipping it overseas is
is prohibitive.
ridiculous. And yes, go in there and I can email you and you can have the book, the ebook edition in 30 seconds, you know.
Yeah,
And it's thanks to my art director, Alec Julian, even as a digital edition, it's really, really, really beautiful. But it also, everybody who gets it say, I love it, but I wish I could hold it. I
yeah,
wish I could feel the pages. I wish I could smell the pages, you know, that kind
yeah. Yeah, it would like we're working on some funding for this year's Flourish Festival, and hopefully we get some and we can have you come and be here and then bring some copies that we could buy. We, you know, grants and sponsorship allowing us to do that would be great because I would really like that's a book I know that my dad would treasure for Christmas. And there's not very many things you can get. We all have so much that finding something for somebody that you know they're just going to love um, is really high on the list. And I don't think we're going to make it to England this year, so I don't think I'll be able to pick up a copy. But yeah, there is something special about a book in your hand, for sure there is. But the next best thing is an immediate copy that you don't have to go to, 6 different bookstores looking for. Awesome. And you know what
well,
the
I hope
last
I've
thing I
been.
got in the mail was? Just a fun fact. The last thing I got in the mail that was not a bill was a Christmas card, which came because I don't know, our Canadian postal service has been striking. But I got a Christmas card yesterday from our mutual friend Julie Wildman in the mail.
Yes.
Yeah. It's so lovely to still get things that people
Yep.
intentionally do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
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 Okay. Well,
Excellent.
I hope I've been sufficiently interesting.
Yeah. Is there anything that we didn't talk about? Oh, I know. What's your favorite pen to write with? I wrote a little note as you were talking, and you're like, I love to sit in cafes. And so I wanted to know what your favorite pen is because my people will want to know.
Well, absolutely. So I I have to stress that I started at the bottom with many different pencils, including some expensive Japanese pencils. And then I tried various like rolling ball type pens. And the pen that I wound up with is a Lamy Joy. And that's
Oh,
not to say that's the best pen in the world or the only pen in the world, but it changed my handwriting and it changed the way I think about writing. It took me about 2 weeks to get used to it, and now,
oh,
you would have to prise it out of my cold dead fingers.
wow. Good for, I'm going to make that, I'm going to also add that to my list of things I want.
Yes.
Add it to the list. Okay. Thank you, Tim. I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. I know you are like overwhelmed with moving stuff and furniture free. So I read this in my teens. Shirley MacLaine wrote a book that I read when I was probably about 17 or 18 called Out on a Broken Limb. And she said something in there about, I don't know, she was in a very spiritual thing. I I'm going to say it was I don't know who it was, but it was one of the spiritual leaders. The maximum number of things you can own without starting to diminish your soul is 17. So, maybe you're just going to be in better touch with your soul for the next month or so.
Yes, I would like not to be sleeping on the floor in couch cushions. So one of the 17
That
needs to be my
needs to
bed.
be bad. Yeah, I
Yeah,
agree with you. Like there are some things that you could do without, but a bed is not one of them.
exactly. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to chat.
Perfect.
And if any of your attendees or book club members want to get in touch with me, they can do so through the contact form at endangeredalphabets.com. And I love chatting with people.
Perfect. And you also actually, we should talk about this if you're still running it. On Sundays, you have a fascinating group that meets.
Yep.
And if you look for Tim on LinkedIn, this is how I found you originally. So I know probably through your website, but originally I found you on LinkedIn. It's like the gods put us together somehow. And you have this group that meets, and it's like a discussion group, and you talk about
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
interesting, and there are lots of interesting people in that group. You talk
There
about
really
really
are.
interesting things.
Yep. Yep.
So if you're
So
looking
yes.
for,
Yeah, the other way to get that is, again, you go to endangeredalphabets.com and you click on the blog link. And then there's a blog entry that's called the By Hand Book Club.
yeah. So if you want to be part of a bigger conversation about this, I really recommend. I've only been once to that group because whatever. Because I don't put myself first often enough. I really should add that to my list of things to do because it's so fascinating. But that's a great place to spend a little bit of time on a Sunday. Yeah. Yeah.
Yep, we rock and roll.
You rock and roll. There you go. Okay. Thanks again, my
All
friend.
right,
See you
thank
soon.
you. All the best.
Thank you.